So if you think about it, communication is Homo sapiens' superpower. It's the thing that has made it possible for us to build families and villages and towns and aircraft carriers and video game consoles. Without communication, we're not that special.
That is Charles Duhigg, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author of this book, and most recently, this book, Supercommunicators. So why does he think it's important to be a supercommunicator?
They tend to do better in almost every setting. They're more popular, succeed better at work, they're better at getting deals, they earn more money, they tend to be happier and healthier as they get older.
And how hard is it to become one?
Nobody is born a great communicator. Nobody's born a supercommunicator. There's a handful of skills that make us good communicators. When we practice those skills until they become habits, that's what separates the best communicators from everyone else.
The MoneyTalk Podcast, brought to you by TD Wealth with Kim Parlee.
Hi, everyone. It is great to have you with us. And Charles, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This is such a treat.
It is a treat. And I'm looking forward to the conversation. How long would you say that you have been a supercommunicator for?
Well, we're all supercommunicators at one time or another, right? And there's actually a great question I can ask you to sort of flesh this out. If you were having a really, really bad day and you wanted to call someone that, you know, talking to them would just make you feel better, do you know who you would call? Like, does that person pop into your mind?
Absolutely.
Yeah? So who is it?
I have my friend Bruce and my friend Terrence, either one.
So for you, Bruce and Terrace are both supercommunicators, and you're probably a supercommunicator back to them, right? You probably know what question to ask them to figure out what's really going on. You know when they want a kind word and when they kind of need some tough love, or when they want someone just to empathize or someone to give them advice. We are all supercommunicators, but some of us are supercommunicators on a more consistent basis. Some people can connect with basically anyone. They know how to connect with strangers the same way that you can connect with Bruce. And those are people who have just learned a handful of skills that make them into better communicators.
I love that you say that, and you mentioned this, and we all have the potential to be super communicators. I know people who are not super communicators. I'm just going to say that, but maybe they have the potential to be there. And you talk about in your book, and again, and many of the things that you've done that, and I thought was funny that journalists, of which I come from, and I know that you do as well, sometimes are not good communicators. But it's not a talent; it's a skill.
That's exactly right. Nobody is born a great communicator. Nobody's born a supercommunicator. In fact, if you talk to the best communicators and you ask them, were you always good at communication? They inevitably say something like, no, when I was in high school, I had real trouble making friends, right? So I had to study how kids talk to each other, or my parents got divorced when I was young and I had to be the peacemaker between them. What we know from study after study is that communication is not something you're born with. The ability to communicate is something that happens when we pay attention to communication, when we recognize that there's a handful of skills that make us good communicators, when we practice those skills until they become habits. That's what separates the best communicators from everyone else, not some inherent characteristic like they're outgoing or they have the gift of gab, but rather that they just think a little bit harder about communication, and then they practice getting good at it.
I love, you allude to this, and we'll get into all this, but a lot of the communication is actually not what you say, it's what you hear and how you listen and what you're paying attention to when you're doing things as well.
That's right. That's exactly right. And there's a lot of listening and of speaking that doesn't happen because we're not paying close enough attention to it.
Can I ask you, I mean, you are a prolific author, and as I mentioned, journalist, Pulitzer Prize-winning. Congratulations, that's amazing.
Thanks.
Tell me why you wrote this book.
Yeah, so I found myself falling into this habit with my wife where I would come home. I was working at the New York Times at that point, and I would come home after a long day and I'd start complaining about my day. I'd say, my coworkers don't appreciate me, or my boss doesn't realize what a genius I am. And my wife would do this very, very reasonable thing. She would give me some good advice. She would say something like, why don't you take your boss out to lunch and you guys can get to know each other a little bit better? And instead of being able to hear her giving me good advice, I would get even more upset, right? And I would start to say, like, why aren't you supporting me? Like, why aren't you on my side? You should be outraged on my behalf. And then she would get upset because I was attacking her for giving me good advice. This is a pattern that I think is familiar to everyone, right? We often have conversations, even with the people that we love the most, that can go off the rails. And so I went to all these researchers and I asked them, what's going on here? I'm a professional communicator. Why do I keep falling into this trap again and again and again? And they said two things. They said, first of all, we're really glad you showed up because we are actually living through a period of understanding communication for really the first time. Because of advances in neural imaging and data collection, we can see inside people's brains as they're having a conversation. And the second thing they said is they said, you know, when you're having a discussion, you think you know what that discussion is about. You're talking about your day, or you're talking about next quarter's numbers, or where we should go on vacation next year. But they said, if we can look inside your brain while you're having that discussion, what we actually see is that you're having many different kinds of conversations all at the same time. And these conversations, they tend to fall into one of three buckets. There's these practical conversations, which is about solving problems together or making plans. But then there's also emotional conversations where I tell you what I'm feeling, and I don't want you to solve my feelings. I want you to empathize. And then there's social conversations, which is about how we relate to each other and society, the identities that are important to us. And what the researchers said is they said, what we've discovered is all three of these different kinds of conversations are all equally legitimate, right? And oftentimes all three of them will happen in one discussion. But if you and the person you are talking to are not having the same kind of conversation at the same moment, you can't fully hear each other. You won't feel connected to each other. And that's, of course, exactly what was happening with me and my wife. I was having an emotional conversation. She was having a practical conversation. They're both legitimate conversations, but they were like two ships passing in the night.
I think that's where we want to get to by the end of this, in terms of helping people understand how to have, the right conversation or connect the right way. But I want to go back to the point you just mentioned about you can see inside people's brains and you could see some of what's happening. And I know you talk about neural entrainment in the book. So maybe just explain what that is and what is seen.
When you're in a conversation, including this conversation between us right now, even though we're separated by thousands of miles, when you're in a conversation, your bodies and brains start to change. So without us realizing it, in this conversation, our breath patterns have started to match each other. Our heart rates have started to match each other. Even though we're in very different places and there's different light around us, the dilation of the pupils of our eyes has started to echo each other. And if we could see inside our brains, if we could look at what's happening as we're having this conversation, our thoughts are becoming more and more synchronous, right? They actually would look the same on a screen if we were tracing sort of the neural activity. And that kind of makes sense when you think about it, because if I describe an emotion to you, you actually experience that emotion a little bit. Or if I describe an idea, you experience that idea. This is called neural entrainment as we become more and more similar. And it's actually the goal of communication. We tend to think of communication as like an information sharing device, but what it actually is, the reason it evolved within our brains is because of a pro-social instinct. Because when we become neurally entrained, I trust you more. I like you more. I'm more able to be persuaded by you. And that doesn't mean we agree about everything. We could have a conversation about politics and you could see things one way and I see them a different way. But as long as we become entrained, as long as that conversation feels like we're connecting with each other, we might walk away still disagreeing, but we will like and trust and be connected to each other more than before. And that's what neural entrainment does.
It's a fascinating thought too, because as you're reading the book, and I highly recommend everyone reads the book, it's fantastic. You talk about the research, and so when you think about, okay, how do you get this neural entrainment? How do you engage with people? It may not be the way you think. It's not the dominant person in the room who's coaching people or doing things. I think you tell me what the people were called. Are these the high centrality people?
High centrality participants.
What do they do and what do they cause?
So high centrality participants in studies are supercommunicators, right? The scientists don't like to use terms like supercommunicators because it seems too mass market. So they call them high centrality participants. But what they find is that these people have certain characteristics. You're exactly right. They are not necessarily the most outgoing or the biggest presence or the biggest personality in that room. They certainly don't talk the most. But when they do talk, they do certain things. First of all, they ask many more questions than everyone else, like 10 to 20 times as many questions. And some of those questions are questions that are just invitations to participate. Like, Jim, what do you think about that? Or, Mary, you mentioned you went there on vacation. What was it like? Like, they're just questions that draw and invite someone into the discussion. But they also ask a number of what are known as deep questions. And deep questions are questions that ask me about my values or my beliefs or my experiences. And that can sound a little intimidating when I put it that way, but it's as simple as if you meet someone who's a doctor, instead of asking them, oh, what hospital do you work at? Asking them, oh, what made you decide to go to medical school? That second question, that question draws out who they are. It gives them a chance to talk about what they value in life and the experiences that they had. It's as easy a question to ask as the first one, but it does something magical when we ask it. And so that's one of the things that high centrality participants do. They have this skill where they ask deep questions. And then in addition, they pay attention to what kind of conversation is happening. And if you're having a practical conversation, they'll match you or they'll invite you to match them. Within psychology, this is known as the matching principle. And what it says is that successful communication requires having the same kind of conversation at the same moment.
How do you, I guess two questions I'm going to ask, and this might sound like a really dumb question, because, you've written a book called Supercommunicators. It's about how to become one. Why? Why do we want that? I mean, it feels good. You want to connect with people, but do we know, are they more successful? Do supercommunicators do better?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Across the board. So if you think about it, communication is Homo sapiens' superpower, right? It's human superpower. It is the thing that sets us apart from every other species. It's the thing that has made it possible for us to build families and villages and towns and aircraft carriers and video game consoles. Without communication, we're not that special. But communication is the thing that has allowed us to rise above every other species. And the people who are good at communication, and that doesn't mean the people who talk the most. It doesn't mean the people who are most charming. The people who are good at communication, they tend to do better in almost every setting. They're more popular. They oftentimes succeed better at work. They're better at getting deals. They earn more money. They tend to get married. They have more stable marriages. They tend to be happier and healthier as they get older. Communication and connection is at the core of what humans crave and what we do so well. And being good at that makes life better for you.
And I think that's where I just want to be is if you're going to aspire towards something, we want to know, it's worth it. It is a good thing. And you tend to see these things play out because it's work and it's not natural for a lot of people. And I just, I can say in a professional environment, if you work in the finance industry or if you work, anywhere in a professional, asking deep questions quickly might turn people off. Maybe that's go ahead.
No,
sorry.
It really doesn't. There's a bunch of studies on this. So again, a deep question doesn't have to be something where I'm like, tell me about your mom and was she ever mad at you? It doesn't have to be something that feels deep. It just has to invite people to talk about their beliefs or their experiences or their values. So for instance, I could ask you, where do you live? Which part of the city do you live in? I
live in the east part of Toronto.
The east part of Toronto. Okay.
Yeah.
So do you like the east part of Toronto? What do you like about it? Why do you live there?
Oh, I love it. I love it because the neighborhood I live in, and it's something I moved there temporarily when I first moved in. But my community, the people that I'm around, are just the most fantastic people ever.
Okay, so that's a really easy question for me to ask, right? Why do you live in East Toronto?
Yeah.
And the answer you told me so much about you. You told me that you're a people person, right? That community is important to you.
Yeah.
That you're someone who's open to serendipity, that you moved to a new neighborhood sort of just because you got to Toronto and you needed someplace to live and you sort of found your people there and invested in that place. It tells me a lot about your values. It tells me about your experiences, that you didn't grow up in Toronto, right? You probably came here from somewhere else. I could ask you more about that. Asking deep questions, the reason we shy away from it is because we're worried that it's hard. We're worried that it'll feel like work. We're worried that it'll be awkward. But the truth of the matter is that our brains have evolved to be really, really good at asking questions. And in fact, there's a part of our brain, the basal ganglia, that exists just to make habits. And one of the things that we know about it is that it's very, very fast and good at making communication habits. You can pick up communication habits faster than almost any other behavior. And so that means that if I set a goal for myself to ask one deep question today that I wouldn't have asked otherwise, and it could be something as simple as why do you live in East Toronto? And then I do the same thing tomorrow and the day after that, maybe when I'm thinking about it today, it's going to seem awkward in my head, But by the day after tomorrow, it's going to feel automatic. It's going to feel natural. It's not going to feel like work. It's going to feel like the most natural thing I could do.
We're delving into your other area of expertise on the habit side, which is great, right? You want to make those habits and make it so you can build it. But it's maybe some of the people I'm around. I think I work a lot of very quiet folks, so I think it's harder sometimes to start that process and start with the deep conversations. I know one piece that you talked about in the book where I think it was somebody goes through, is it 36 questions to go from a quick connection? Tell us a bit about that and how that works.
So this is known as the Fast Friends procedure, and it started about 2 decades ago when there were these 2 researchers in Rhode Island, both psychologists who were married to each other. And they're research psychologists, and they wanted to see if they could figure out if there was a technique that would make any two strangers into friends. And so they tried all this stuff. They had strangers come in and do puzzles together, or to go on a hike together, or to sing songs together, or simply tap their fingers together. And what they found is that none of it worked, right? Like, some people became friends, other people didn't become friends. It was basically just what you would see in any normal distribution. And so they're kind of thinking that they're going to give up on this project. And then they decide, okay, we're going to try one more thing. What we're going to do is we're going to write a list of 36 questions. And the questions start pretty easy, right? The first question is, if you could have a dinner party with anyone in the world, who would you invite? Which is actually an easy, deep question, right? Because it's kind of fun. And then the questions get deeper much faster. Question number 7 is, do you have a hunch about how you will die? Then just a couple questions later is, tell me about your mother. And then the second to last question is, when's the last time you cried in front of another person? So what they do is they write up these questions, and they bring strangers in one by one. They sit them down across from someone they don't know. They hand them the questions, and they say, okay, ask and answer back and forth. Like, ask the first question, and then the person who's the answer will ask you, and we'll go back and forth, go through all 36. It should only take about 45 minutes. And so they go ahead and do that, and people have these conversations, and they ask the questions, and then everyone leaves, assuming that the experiment is over. But actually, the experiment has just begun. Because what the researchers do is that 7 weeks later, they call all the people who had been in that room, and they ask them all the same question. Just out of curiosity, did you ever talk to that person again? Like that person that you did the questions thing with? Did you guys ever connect again? And people would say things like, oh yeah, I didn't catch his last name. I know his first name was John, and his last name started with an R. And so I got out the directory and I called every single John R in the directory until I found him. One guy actually said, yeah, me and the person I did it with, we got a beer afterwards. And then like a week later, we saw a movie together. And when that couple got married a year after the experiment, they invited everyone in the laboratory to come and to the ceremony. What the researchers found is that 70% of the people who were in those rooms sought out the person they had done this experiment with, not because they had anything in common with them, not because they had been paired in a way that you think maybe makes them likely to become friends, but because this act of asking and answering deep questions makes us feel close to each other.
That's
and
amazing.
That closeness is so valuable.
That's just utterly amazing, though, when you think about it, because it could just be random. It could be anybody. And it's that human connection that just keeps people together. When you give it the opportunity to spark up, amazing
things
wonderful.
Happen. I do it with my kids. So anyone can find the questions. You just type in Fast Friends procedure or the 36 questions that lead to love. You'll find them on the internet. And they're great. They're great questions. It's always fun.
My latest one's my 15-year-old, and again, he's a 15-year-old boy, so sometimes the conversations are a bit challenging. I just ask him to rate his day, and it's funny because if you watch people stop and think about what that number is, and then they get to tell you why, and it's been great. It's been eye-opening. It's been fantastic on that front. I wanted to ask you, you have a story of Dr. Adai, who I'm not sure if he's an oncologist or a prostate surgeon, in terms of how he delivered news and how he was listening to patients. And I'd love you just to tell us about that one, because I think it's fascinating in terms of, the outcomes that he got.
Yeah. So Dr. Adai, Bafar Adai, is a surgeon in New York City at Sloan Kettering. And he's probably the world's leading expert on removing prostate tumors. So every day a patient will come into his office for the first time, having just learned that they have cancer, that there's a tumor on their prostate. And Dr. Adai, initially, he told me he assumed that they were there for his advice, so he'd give them advice. And so what he would say is, look, I realize that this is really scary to learn that you have cancer. But the thing about prostate cancer is that it's very, very slow growing. In fact, we have a saying in medicine that for older patients, you're more likely to die of old age than for the cancer to kill you. And so here's my advice for what you should do. Nothing. Like, don't even pretend you didn't even learn you had cancer. And we'll do this thing called active surveillance, where we'll take a blood sample every 6 months and we'll measure your PSA levels. We'll biopsy the tumor every 2 years just to make sure it's not growing faster than we think it should. And if it is, we'll stick you in an MRI and we'll figure out what to do next. But besides that, don't do anything at all, because the best way for me to remove the cancer is to do surgery, but the surgery is really risky. So he would tell patients this, and then they would go home and they'd discuss it with their spouse, and they would come back 3 days later for a follow-up. And inevitably what they would say is, thank you so much for the advice. I want you to cut me open as fast as humanly possible. Like I want to have the surgery today if possible. And this was really confusing for Dr. Duhigg because he figured they were coming to him for his advice. He is an expert, and yet they are completely ignoring the advice he gives them. Until he realizes it's not that they're ignoring the advice, it's that they literally can't hear the advice. So he goes to these professors at Harvard Business School and he says, tell me what to do differently. And they say, okay, look, you got to start the conversation with the patient completely differently. You got to start by asking a deep question. So going forward, what Dr. Duhigg does is he starts asking all the patients who come in. The first question is, tell me what this cancer diagnosis means to you. And patients would say things like, my dad died when I was 17. And I saw what that did to my mom, and I don't want to put my wife through that. I don't want to put my kids through that. Or they would talk about, I have all these fears about the future and climate change with what my grandkids growing up in. They would talk for often 5 or 10 minutes, and not once would they mention cancer or fears of mortality or fears of pain. What Dr. Duhigg realized is that these people, they needed to have an emotional conversation before they could have a practical conversation, before they could talk about treatment options. He needed to match them. And so what he would do is he would talk about himself, the thing that a doctor is never supposed to do. He would tell them stories about how his own dad had gotten sick. And he understands exactly what these people are feeling because his own dad went through it. And then he would say something like, if you don't mind, can I tell you about some treatment options? In other words, can we move from an emotional conversation to a practical conversation together? And they would say yes, and he would tell them about active surveillance, and that was it. They would just opt for active surveillance. The number of patients opting for active surveillance went up by over 65% since Dr. Duhigg made this one change, asking a deep question at the beginning of his conversation with a patient.
So if somebody's listening, and again, I'm going to recommend people, pick the book up because you have all sorts of very specific, I'll say tools, habits, ways of doing this. But for someone who's listening and say, I want to start being a better communicator, you've outlined there's 3, simultaneous conversations going on at once or potential conversations going on at once. How do you start?
So asking those deep questions, right? Like asking a deep question. I mean, let me ask you. So think about the rest of your day or tomorrow.
Okay.
When's an opportunity that you could ask someone a deep question that you might not ask otherwise, right? It's sort of if you wanted to shoehorn one in, when would that happen for you in the next day?
That would happen to me this evening.
Yeah. So tell me about it. So what's going to happen this evening?
Gosh, we're going to get personal on a podcast. Here we go. So I'm supposed to ask you the questions. I am going to be out for dinner and at an event with some friends. And I have a friend who is going through some significant health issues, prostate, as a matter of fact, which is part of the reason I asked you. And I want a chance just to ask him what's important to him over the next little while, how I can help.
Yeah. And when you think about asking that question, does it seem hard to you? Does it make you anxious, or does that feel like a pretty natural question for you to ask?
I think for me, I have no problem asking quick, deep questions. I'll be honest. I'm probably the person who goes very deep, very quickly, and people are like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, that's a little too much, too fast." So, how do I feel? I get a little emotional. I'm present to hopefully being able to help them.
Yeah, and I think that's a really natural instinct, right? To find an opportunity to ask some, because when we ask a deep question, what we're actually asking is like, what are you thinking about? What matters to you, right? I'm sure this guy is thinking about prostate cancer all the time, right? I'm sure he's worried about it, and he's angry, and he's upset, and he's grateful for having good friends around him. And to have all that stuff going on inside your head and not be able to share it with the world, not be able to put it into words, it feels like we're lacking something. Mm-hmm. And so I would say the first thing that people can do if they want to become super communicators is just look for opportunities to ask a question that's a little bit deeper, mm-hmm. right? A question that asks someone, instead about the facts of their life, asks them how they feel about their life.
Yeah.
Or asks them why they made the decision rather than what happened next.
Do you ever, and how do you know if you're talking to somebody and you're having, you're asking a deep conversation that, maybe they're just shut down emotionally, or maybe they're just not open to having the conversation? Like, what do you do in those situations? Like, is there a way to try and get that, that matching going if it's not there?
Well, I think if somebody doesn't want to have a conversation with you, there's no way to trick them into doing it, right?
True. Point taken, yeah.
And no one has to have a conversation, right? Just because we know how to have conversations, that doesn't mean that we have to have conversations. Sometimes you get into the Uber and you just want to check your email. You don't want to have a conversation with the driver. Sometimes you come home and you're exhausted and you don't want to interact with your family. And that's okay. It's okay not to have a conversation. What is important, equally important though, is that when you do want to have a conversation, to have the skills at your disposal so that that conversation can go well. And so I would say if somebody doesn't want to have a conversation with you, then that's okay. Just go find someone else to talk to. But if you really want to have a conversation, if they want to connect with you and you're having trouble connecting with each other, then I think the key is to think about, how do I structure this conversation in a way? What kind of questions can I ask? How can I show them that I'm listening to them? Mm-hmm. We've talked a lot about talking, but not so much about listening. The third big skill that super communicators have is that they're very good at proving to you that they're listening to you.
And how do you do that?
Well, we tend to think of listening as like a passive activity, right? That I sort of close my mouth and I open my ears. And that's the first step of listening, but that's not sufficient on its own. What happens next is really important, because I have to prove to you that I'm listening. Because in the back of your mind, you have a little bit of suspicion. This person isn't actually listening to me, right? They're just waiting their turn to speak, or they're just sort of, placating me by listening to my story. And so what's really critical is to prove that you're listening. And it can be as easy as asking follow-up questions. It can be easy as easy as saying, oh, that's really interesting that you mentioned that, because something similar happened to me, to prove that you're paying attention. Now, in conflict conversations, in conversations where we disagree with each other, there's actually a technique for this that's been shown to be really, really powerful, which is, it's known as looping for understanding. And it's got 3 steps. Step 1 is that you ask a question, preferably a deep question. Step 2 is that when the person has answered that question, repeat back in your own words what you heard them say, right? And the goal here is not mimicry. The goal here is to show them that you're really thinking about what they said. You're reframing it in a new way. You're giving it new words and new life. And most of us, we learn to do these first 2 steps somewhat intuitively, right? It's just part of how we move through the world. It's step 3 that I always forget, because step 3 is, after I repeat back to you what I heard you say, ask if you got it right. Say something like, did I hear you correctly? Am I understanding? Because in that moment, what I'm actually doing is I'm asking you for permission to acknowledge that I was listening. And if you acknowledge that I am listening to you, you become much, much more likely to listen to me in return.
Where, I know you mentioned all the research, but do you have anything in terms of that backs up those insights to see how effective that is?
Oh, yeah. There's a ton of studies that have looked at looping for understanding. In fact, one study, I can't remember the researcher's name off the top of my head, but it was in the Journal of Workplace Education, I believe. What he found was that in his study, looping for understanding was the single most effective technique to lower the temperature in conflict conversations in workplaces. That basically, when you teach managers and CEOs and leaders, when you teach them to listen really well, it tends to make the entire organization work together better. And so absolutely, there's a ton of research to support this.
Do you think workplaces or maybe society, are we getting better or worse at listening right now?
I mean, I think it differs from person to person and company to company and country to country, right? I mean, I don't think it would surprise anyone, particularly here in the U.S. And I know that our northern neighbors in Canada are watching with dismay, as are many of us in the nation. The polarization has gotten out of control, right? I don't think it's surprising to say we seem to have forgotten how to have conversations where we can disagree with each other and still live alongside each other peacefully. And what's interesting is if you think about American history or Canadian history or British history, the periods that we are most proud of are the periods not when we all agreed with each other. It's when people disagreed with each other, but in ways that were civil and where they could live alongside each other. I think just about the writing of the American Constitution, the Continental Convention. You had all these people come together who literally hated each other, and they just screamed at each other for months and months and months, disagreeing with each other, debating, and yet they figured out how to write a constitution together that still exists today. We are at our best, not when we all are on the same page, but when we can discuss things with each other, when we can disagree with each other, when we can air ideas and test them out with each other, and then go and still feel connected to each other, feel like we have something in common, like we're countrymen or we're all humans, and that these disagreements are smaller than the things that we have in common. Yeah.
It's, yes, I 100% agree. And you talk about, I know in the book too, the research done, I think it was, and forgive me, I don't remember exactly, but it was the group that got together that, in person could, treat each other as individuals, and they agreed to disagree civilly, but then got online and it went really poorly.
Well, yeah, this was an experiment that was done with here in the U.S. with gun rights advocates, people who think that everyone should own guns and there should be no laws, and gun control activists, people who think that there should be many more laws about guns in the U.S. And you're exactly right. So these are people who normally just would scream at each other all day long. And what they did is they brought a bunch of them to Washington, D.C., and they taught them things like looping for understanding and, asking questions, deep questions. And what they found is that when people were face to face, if they use these techniques, if they use these skills, it went really, really well. And people felt close to each other. They didn't change their minds. They didn't agree with each other, but they felt close to each other. They felt connected. And then they sent everyone home and they set up this Facebook group, for a private Facebook group for them to continue the conversation. And literally within hours of the Facebook group starting, they were just insulting each other. And so the researchers, they tried to figure out what happened. And what they discovered was this. Each form of communication has slightly different rules, right? And if we forget those rules, and we know this, we know that calling someone is different from texting someone, is different from sending an email to them or seeing them face to face, that an emoji means something different than a word that you might write. We know that there are rules, that different channels of communication require different modes or different rules to be successful. What happens is that sometimes we just forget to remind ourselves of the rules. And we say, oh, I just talked to this person, and when I was talking to them, I could make a sarcastic joke, so I'm just going to make a sarcastic joke online. And the person reads it, and they don't understand that it's sarcastic. They can't hear the sarcasm in your voice because they can't hear your voice. And so they think you're being serious, and now suddenly they're offended because they think that you said something mean. What we know about online communication is that the rules for online communication are you should not ever use sarcasm because people are going to miss it. That if we're more polite when we're online, it has hugely beneficial outcomes. In fact, in one study, they found that people who are arguing online, who are Reddit moderators, that just one person using please and thank you would often change an entire conversation. There's just a bunch of rules that we know. We know about online communication. And when we get into trouble is when we forget to remind ourselves of them.
It's funny. That's been one of the best uses of AI I've had recently is just when you write a terse email, it's like, make this nicer, please.
Yeah.
And it does. It's a very useful thing just to, to match my intent, not my actually sometimes what I write.
Exactly.
Which is
exactly.
great. Charles, we have a few scenarios of like real life situations that people might be going through. Let me put a few out to you and tell me maybe from a super communicator standpoint how you might address these. So in this situation, you've got a spouse. They've inherited a lot of money from their parents, and the other spouse is a more cautious spender. Somebody wants to upgrade to a $7 million new home, and splurge, and there's a lot of tension between the two of them. How would you navigate something like that if you were one of those spouses?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is to try and figure out what are we actually talking about, right? So if somebody wants to upgrade to a $7 million home, let's talk about why. Is it because you want to impress your friends that you're rich, or is it because that $7 million home, it's like your dream home, it's exactly the place that you want to live, and it's a home that you think you could be happy in for the rest of your life? Is it because the kids are leaving and you want to have places for them to come back and bring your grandchildren to? Like, let's sit down and figure out, because the reason you're buying the house is not because it costs $7 million, right? $7 million is the side effect of the house that you are thinking of buying. So let's figure out what our goals are, and then figure out how those goals get aligned. Because I might be very well saying, I agree with you completely. I want to live in that neighborhood too. But let me just tell you, buying a $7 million house makes me really uneasy, because I'm not certain that, like, as we get older, we're going to be able to cover the mortgage payment, right? Once you're talking about the why, you're going to have a much better understanding, and you're going to feel more connected to each other.
I like that. I've got another one for you here. This is one where we'll take this situation. So there's a son who is feeling obligated to financially support other family members abroad. That son might maybe put his personal goals on hold to make sure that, he's taking care of others, and then maybe starting to resent. How could someone like that broach the conversation with those other members?
Well, I think what's really important is to frame it not in terms of you are doing something wrong, but rather, let me tell you how I feel, right? Because let's say it's my parents that I'm taking care of and I'm sending them money. It's really easy if I say, look, I feel like I'm sending you too much money. It's really easy for them to hear that I am resentful, right? I blame them for not having enough money, that I'm angry at them, that they should be ashamed that their son has to support them. So rather than making it about you, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to talk about me, and I'm going to say, look, I love you guys so much, and I love being able to support you, and I love the life that you've built for yourself. But I feel like my life is changing now, and I want to start building my family. Like, I want to have kids, and I need to have a nest egg to do that. And that means that I need to start saving my money a little bit more. So if it's okay, I'd like to send you guys less. And it's not because of you. It's not because I know that you aren't grateful, but it's because I feel this way, and that feeling is important to me. What I'm doing there is everyone can relate to that, right? Everyone knows that feeling that, like, when you're about to have kids, that you really want to you get anxious. You want to build up a nest egg. So instead of making it about you, the things that you're doing to me, the things that you're doing wrong, I'm just telling you how I feel. Because when I do that, I'm an expert in how I feel. And oftentimes I'm going to say something that seems familiar to how you feel sometimes too.
Listen, Charles, it's an amazing book. And there's so many great pieces in here for people to learn. Let me ask you, though, if somebody could take one habit, I know you talked about it, ask one deep question. So I'm going to say not that one, right. Please give me another one. What is one person, or what to change their life, to change how they communicate? What's one thing they can do?
So here's something that I think everyone can do. One of the things that we know is that having close relationships makes our life much, much better. In fact, the U.S. Surgeon General has said that being lonely is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And 15 cigarettes a day is like actually a lot of cigarettes, right? That's just not just a social smoker. So they've done studies to try and figure out what causes us to be happier and healthier and more successful as we age. And what they found is that best predictor of happiness, health, and success at age 65 is having at least a handful of close relationships at age 45 and keeping those relationships up. So here's the habit that I would give to everyone. There is someone who you like a lot, someone who you think is like, they're just, they've been an important part of your life at some point, and you have not talked to them in 3 months or 6 months or 12 months or 18 months. It's been a while. And now it's been so long that you put off reaching out to them again, right? Because you're worried that if you give them a phone call, like the first 3 minutes are going to be kind of awkward because you can't remember their wife's name or can't remember how old their kids are, or you have to be like, hey, how's the last 2 years been? But here's the thing. If you pick up the phone and you make that phone call, yes, the first 90 seconds might be a little bit awkward. And then it's going to be wonderful. And you are going to feel so good when you put the phone down. You're going to remind yourself how much you like this person and why it's so great to talk to them. You'll be making yourself healthier and happier and more successful. So that's the habit I would urge for people. Reach out to that person, have conversations, find the people who matter to you and invest in them, and they will pay back huge dividends.
It's a great piece of advice. Amazing. Truly the last question. I keep saying I'm going to ask you the last question, and I ask you one more. But this is book number 3, is it not?
Right. Yes.
I feel like you strike me as someone who has insatiable curiosity, and as you write one, you get any clues? Is there more coming? What's the next topic that you
I don't know. It's a good question. I'm writing for the New Yorker magazine about AI right now, and so I'm spending a lot of time thinking about AI. But I don't know. If anyone has a topic you think I should write on, let me know.
We will. Charles, such a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Money Talk Podcast, brought to you by TD Wealth, recorded on November 20th, 2025. The information contained herein has been provided by TD Wealth and is for information purposes only. The information has been drawn from sources believed to be reliable. The information does not provide financial, legal, tax, or investment advice. Particular investment, tax, or trading strategies should be evaluated relative to each individual's objectives and risk tolerance. TD Wealth represents the products and services offered by TD Waterhouse Canada, TD Waterhouse Private Investment Council, TD Wealth Private Banking, offered by the Toronto Dominion Bank, and TD Wealth Private Trust, offered by the Canada Trust Company. All third-party products and services referred to or advertised in this presentation are sold by the company or organization named. While these products or services may serve as valuable aids to the independent investor, TD Direct Investing or TD Wealth does not specifically endorse any of the products or services. The third-party products and services referred to or advertised in this presentation are available as a convenience to its customers only, and TD Direct Investing or TD Wealth is not liable for any claims, losses, or damages however arising out of any purchase or use of third-party products or services. The TD logo and other TD trademarks are the property of the Toronto Dominion Bank or its subsidiaries.